Welcome to Patriarchy Principles, the podcast where we dive deep into the intersection of faith, family, and politics. Designed with fathers in mind, we aim to shed light on the political issues that directly impact your household and guide you to taking informed, meaningful action. Grounded in Christian values, we explore what the Bible says about leadership, responsibility, and navigating the complexities of today's world. Join us as we discuss how to protect and provide for your family, not just spiritually, but in every aspect of life. For tuning in. Appreciate you being here. I am super excited for this conversation today. I have the opportunity and the honor of speaking with Q, the host of the Mediocre Dad podcast. With Q has a decade of military service, including deployment in Afghanistan. Q brings a wealth of experience to his roles as a father, coach, and mentor. His podcast shines a light on the essential role dads play in our lives, while also challenging stereotypes about modern fatherhood. I'm so excited to delve into his journey and the powerful lessons he's learned along the way. So, Q, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. It's as I said before we hit record, it's really awesome to be on the podcast, but it's also awesome to be on this side of the podcast where I'm the guest rather than the host, where I had to do all the pressing the buttons and leading the charge, so I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, there's been many a times where I meant to hit pause on the intro music, but then I hit end recording, so then we have to do it all over again.
I love it.
It's happened too many a times, or where I'll just turn the volume down and then I'll hit pause, but then I need it again later, but then I can't hear it because there's no volume. So pressing the buttons is probably the hardest part. It has to be the hardest part.
Oh yeah.
For sure. But before we jump into it, of course, with your military service, just for myself, thank you for your service in our armed forces, especially with the deployment in Afghanistan. So
thank you for support. I really appreciate that.
So very first, as we kick it off here, we're going to dive into a bunch of topics today, tons of fun stuff. But before we get too started, I just want to let all the listeners know that you can find Young Dad Podcast on Patreon. You can become a patron for just $1 a month to $2 a month, and you get a bunch of exclusive access. If you like the recordings, and if you want to be a part of them live in the audience, in the studio, of the recording software that we use, that's a perk. If you want early access to conversations, every episode early, no matter what it is, you get that perk as well. So it's super fun. It's a great opportunity and a great way to support the podcast as well and be more involved in the YDP community as well. So that's the main business I wanted to get to here at the top. So Q, very first question here that I like to ask a bunch of guests is, what's a hill you're willing to die on when it comes to either being a biblical dad, a present dad, or balancing military leadership with leadership in the home? So any of those three, a hill you're willing to die on?
Wow, that's a heavy question right out the gate. I like it. A hill I'm willing to die on. When it comes to, I'll go with the regards of being a biblical dad. The hill I'm willing to die on when it comes to being a biblical dad is being a leader within the home. I cannot stand men or fathers who so easily will just thinking being a dad is just like, hey, I had kids. My wife takes care of the kids. I go to work, come home, say hi to my kids, go to bed, and do it all over again, right? And the Bible calls us to lead our children, to bring up our children, and it's important that we do that within a way where it requires presence. And so many fathers don't. Sometimes, I'm not going to say all the fathers, right? And I won't say so many, but I see there's a good portion of fathers that I think that I've seen that they think presence is just being in the same room as their child, rather than actually like, hey, have you ever played with your child? Do you know what your child likes? Do you know what your child's interests are? All these different things. So I think one of the biggest things for me is presence, but it's also presence in the way that the Bible calls us to be present within our kids or within our children's lives.
100%. I love that. Have you ever read Point Man?
I have not.
Oh, okay. It's a really good. You would like it.
Okay.
You would like it. Just kind of based on that stance right there. Point Man's a really interesting book, to where he's revised it once now, and it's. I'm trying to look it up real quick to see who it's by. But basically, he takes the Bible and parenting, and he goes into basically, like, as fathers, we're the point men of our family.
Oh, okay.
We're the point men of our family. And so it's our responsibility to lead as a point man. It's by Steve Farrar, Farrar. I'll put in the link of the description of this episode so that all the people can see it. But the revised and updated one is the one I've been reading here for a couple of weeks. I just finished it yesterday, so it's really good. It dives into how to have different like uncomfortable conversations, how important it is for us to have that presence, because if we're not present, then someone else is going to get to our kids before we get to them. And it
Absolutely.
goes deeper into how the nuclear family is being destroyed by the adversary, and how the adversary is attacking our boys, and then our boys are corrupted, so then our families are corrupted, and all these things, and just the importance of being involved, being present. And one of the parts that really stuck out to me, like about what you're saying, is like with this present. Back in like 19th, yes, the women would take care of the children, but only up until the boys and the girls were about, well, the boys, if we're talking just boys here, um, until they were about 7, 8 years old. And then they would go and they spent all day side by side with their dads.
Yeah.
The entire day. They didn't just go to school or go to play or anything. They went to work with their dads, and they went and did whatever their dad did. And then if the boy started to express interest when he was like 15, 16, right? That he wanted to go and be a blacksmith or something, then the dad would go and oversee the process of him becoming a blacksmith.
Yeah.
Until he was ready. So it was side by side for a lot of that time, like a lot of that time. And then same for the girls. The girls would be with the mothers doing the same thing. So if the girl wanted to go and run a shop or something, or she wanted to, sew things, but not what the family did, then the mother would oversee that process too. So it's really cool, the engagement here, and just how it's tailed off. And then the biggest change that he pointed out in this is that school. Sorry, I'm spoiling the book for you, but he talks about it much more eloquently than I can. But how schooling kind of backtracked our society there and took fathers away from the sons and mothers away from the daughters, and fathers away from the daughters and everyone. And then work and responsibilities and everything is all really caught up to us in this day, to where that lack of presence is really damaging our society, like to a point where there's active threats every day on our schools from kids within the schools.
Yeah.
Like there was threats going on around here in the Tri-Cities just this last week, and that was crazy. It was like, what? Why? What? And then one of the sheriffs in Florida is arresting kids and perp walking them, and then and it's Florida, so they can kind of do whatever they want down there. But they're gonna put a billboard up with all the kids who have been arrested for making threats and trying to carry out threats at their school, and basically publicly humiliate them because the parents aren't doing anything. And then the parents, if they're also caught not doing anything, the sheriff is gonna perp walk them too and process them too. And so it's damaging to our society with that lack of presence. It's not good.
Did you see? So, I think a lot of this is happening. I mean, there's more to the core of the foundation of the issue, which is the nuclear family that you were talking about, but with specifically with the office, the sheriffs in Florida arresting the parents. This is stemming from what happened in Michigan from that school shooting earlier this. The school shooting was I think it was in 2022 or 2023, but then the parents were just charged. As well earlier this year, and I think they each got like 5 years, I think it was. And so now, like with that being put into almost with that law, that it was not a law, but with that happening with that case, it's now leading to other states being able to say, hey, we can, if there was a case that they charge the parents, we can essentially charge the parents as well for doing these atrocities. But it goes back to, and as you were saying, it goes back to the foundation, right, of that nuclear family, of the presence of the mother and the father, right? Like we as men, right, we put pressure on ourselves as dads and all these other dads to be good and to be better dads and be present dads. But it also is important that the mother plays a central role in the development of your kids as well. And we can't overlook her role, but just like we can't overlook our own role as well.
Absolutely.
And we are equals in the sense of how, when it comes to raising our kids, but pride and whatever the case might be definitely gets involved in that relationship, and it deteriorates, and whatever the case might be. But I think it is it's one of those things where we have forgotten what our values are, our core values, and what's important and what our priorities should be within life, and that is to raise up sons and daughters who are going to be successful members of society, and and not just raising up kids just for the sake of raising up kids because we had kids. The school system is one of those things where I get frustrated thinking about it because what is the purpose of school nowadays, right? The purpose of school is no longer education. It is, I need you to memorize a bunch of stuff just to say that you are educated, rather than
Mhm.
I'm teaching you actual skills and actual things that are going to benefit you in the future. Like here's one of my biggest things, and this is kind of just a thought that came to me. Why don't we teach kids, especially high schooler kids? Why don't we teach high schooler kids about how to do their taxes? Why don't we teach high schooler kids about the more deeper look into economics and how money works and how banks work, right? We teach them like FDIC, right, and what that means and what that looks like because it's part of our history and what ultimately one of the this might be argumentative stance, but it's one of the reasons we were able to get out of the Great Depression, right?
Mhm.
Well, I guess we didn't get it out of the Great Depression. It definitely helped with, put more overseeing over on the banks. But anyway, that being said, one of the many laws that FDR did to help get us out of the Great Depression. But that being said, is like they learn about those things, but then that's kind of it. It's that's it. They learn about, hey, taxation without representation was the American Revolution, but then that's it, right? They don't understand, like they can't tell you about where taxes are applied, how the federal government utilizes taxes, how the state government utilizes taxes. They can't tell you these things, and these are essential things that American people, that all the young people should know about. So when they go into the world, they can sit there and they can analyze their check, and when they first get their first job, say, I understand where my money's going. Maybe I don't know why it's going here. I teach them how to start businesses,
Mhm.
do all these things. Like there's so much more tangible skills that we could be teaching them, as well as the foundational education, rather than just saying, hey, did you go to algebra 2 today? Sorry, haven't used algebra in my adult life outside of a higher education. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents on the matter. But
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. It's wild that we don't teach kids things more applicable and
Mhm.
more useful to their
Yeah,
everyday lives, and that we don't educate our children about their options, really,
yeah,
right? That they don't know, like, oh, after high school, I could go down this path. I could go down this path. I could go down this path. There's this opportunity here. There's this opportunity here. And that they don't learn these things. But a lot of it, I feel, is so. There's this other book that I really, really love that I talk about. I've talked about several times in the podcast. It's called The Color of Law, and
okay,
it's a very, very good book. It's mostly talking about de jure segregation, but there's a part of it in there to where the author breaks down like the generations and like economics of the generation. So how of a family, if you take 5 kids, there's gonna be one kid that makes if you take 5 kids in poverty or low income or however you want to phrase it, 5 kids. One of the kids has enough family help to get out of that. The one of them is going to be able to get out of that cycle. One of them is going to go up a class. So they're going to go from low class to middle class, right? One's going to figure a way all the way out of it. So then that's going to affect their family. So of the 5, so this one's going out completely. This one's going out of just upper class to the middle class. But these 3 in their families in their future families are going to stay low income, are going to stay in that spot. And so 60% just stays where they're at. But that is a lot, again, kind of like you said about public education and the education system. It's broken, it's damaged, it's pathetic.
yeah,
I have a family that I work with at work. They moved from Louisiana up here, and the mom expressed like, "Hey, my kids were on track down there in Louisiana. They were at grade level, but here they're like 2-3 years behind." So it's like the standards are different across different places. The standards are different from state to state. It's not just So why do we have, it begs the question of why do we even have a Department of Education when each state has different standards and we don't have one federalized standard of education and standards and things like that? And then some states teach Common Core, some states teach one thing. So if a kid moves and they're behind, or one kid moves and now they're ahead, and so there's a very big imbalance of education from state to state. And I've seen that myself when I went from going to middle school here in Washington State, and then I moved to Hawaii for a couple of years. I was well beyond grade level. I was far, far beyond grade level there, to where most of my peers, like we were in eighth grade. Eighth grade? I think, yeah, eighth grade. And I was reading at an eighth grade level, maybe 9th, 10th, whatever. But a lot of my peers are reading at second, third grade level still.
That's absurd.
And so there's huge gaps all over the place, huge gaps, and it's crazy. It's crazy. It's not right. Public education is a joke. But now, like even here in Washington State, like they are requiring our kids to have more of these required times for ELA, for math, for English, for language arts, for all these different subjects, for these like core subjects, science, math, English, reading, ELA. So now instead of having what they've had in the past of like 20, 30-minute like class periods and then transition to something else, now they have 45-minute chunks in like second, third grade, when the brain, psychologically speaking, you can go for about 20, 25 minutes at that age and actually grasp. Anything after that, it's just dead air after that. So it's hurtful to our kids. The whole system is hurtful to our kids. Like, yes, it would be great if it went back to like the Department of Education. They serve nothing to our country. There's no purpose that the Department of Education serves our country. None. It's just more of a bunch of politicians just taking taxpayer money and doing absolutely nothing with it. So,
Well, I will say that there was a study done, and I can't remember the study. I was working on a college paper, and that's kind of why I know a reason this study exists. And the study was done, and it was looking at students within the United States, students within Japan, and basically what they surmised was that in Japan, that while you're right, the 20 to 25 minutes, that's max capacity of the brain in which these kids probably should be focusing at that age. What they were doing and what they've been doing in Japan is they're how do I put it? They're making it difficult for them on purpose because they want them to grow and they want to apply some difficult challenges to them. So then that for them, it's that, okay, hey, working through it and almost like not necessarily a test, but a test for lack of better words, where these kids are saying like, hey, I want to get this right. I'm trying to get this right. So an example of this would be the teachers would answer a math problem, and then they would tell the kids that the math problem was incorrect. And it would force the kid to have to go back and say, okay, hold on, I applied this, and that, go through it to get to the same answer. And then in the end, they would say, hey, you were correct the whole time. But what that taught them was I was wrong. And instead of just saying, well, I don't know what to do now, I give up, it taught them, hey, I need to keep going. I need to figure out why I was wrong. How do I get there? And it really taught them how to actually solve problems, not only within math, but ultimately what that leads to in life. And so this is some of the things that they were doing in Japan, and why they're at a higher education level if you will, than us in the United States. Because I do believe in challenging kids, but I also don't believe. But on the flip side of that, I don't think that we should challenge kids to the point of where they don't want to do it anymore. Right? Challenging kids, challenging them. It teaches them a lesson outside of just whatever you're teaching them, whether it's language arts, arithmetic, history, science, whatever the case may be. But you want to challenge them so they can grow and develop, not challenge them just so you can play chump the stump and you're the adult and you'd be like, I win. So I will say in that regards, I definitely think we need to be challenging our kids a little bit more in that regards, because ultimately this, and kind of going full circle here, this is what leads to we have men in society today that are weak-minded men, and is overall weak men. And I'm not saying that all men should be physically fit and strong and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, what he did when he was 25, 30 years old. That's not, by no means am I saying that, right? But simple physical fitness regimen, like they did in the 60s and 70s, where these kids were when PE was actual like physical exercise, and you were actually exercising. Like that's what we should be. That's what should be incorporating. Starting simple things, right? That regards, but then also these men, they learn what being a man looks like, right? Hey, I'm physically strong, great, but I use that physical strength to benefit me and or protect other people, especially to protect the men and women, or the women and the young kids in our society, right? Like that's what my strength needs to be used for, or mentally, right? We don't need, not every man is going to be out here, lifting a 500 pounds off the ground, but we need intellectual men, right? But a lot of these men, we've deteriorated them to the point where there's like, you don't need to worry about that. You need to worry about, your feelings and your emotions. And don't get me wrong, being an emotionally intelligent is a good thing. But man, oh man, we have prioritized that over teaching men how to be men, but also understand what emotional intelligence is.
We've also taken this, and I saw this on TikTok actually by a teacher, but it's something that a lot of teachers are like on the side of trying to get rid of. It's called learned helplessness. There's a lot of learned helplessness among our kids, to where so basically what learned helplessness is we have taught our kids and taught ourselves as a society, if we have a problem, if we try hard, if we try our best, quote unquote, and we put our best foot forward into it, someone else will come and solve it for us if we can't. Someone else will come and help us. Someone else will come and do it for us. Someone else will come and save the day, basically, right? And so there's this thing of learned helplessness that is rampart among our children today, and rampart in our society, especially among men, right? But another thing that within Point Man says that a lot of this goes back to Lyndon B. Johnson. I'm sorry if you love Lyndon B. Johnson, you're a kook anyway, but
gosh,
Lyndon B. Johnson created a lot of problems for our society, and I will call that out 100% of the day. The welfare system is one of the absolutely most broken systems in America.
Man, I love
I've heard it referred to as I've seen videos of this on TikTok, or maybe it was Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. Like these African American women, and I'm African American, I'm biracial. And so I bring this up because these African American women say, okay, we're on welfare, and it's just like when you have a sugar daddy. He gives you just enough to pay your bills. Sorry, I'm pulling a Kamala there. Sorry, I don't want to accent drop here. Not trying to do that. Not trying to do that. But it's like you got enough to pay your bills. You get enough to do this. You get enough to do that. You get enough to do that. But you only get just enough. You never get more. You never get less. You always get just enough to keep you coming back for more. And so it's damaged our system. And Lyndon B. Johnson literally destroyed the nuclear family single-handedly with his politics and his economic format, to where he incentivized single parents. He incentivized fathers being out of the home. He incentivized fathers not being with their children. He incentivized single mothers. So now we're seeing this kind of catch up to all of us. And I don't know what year Lyndon B. Johnson was president.
1968. 1968,
Okay.
Lyndon B. Johnson passed a law in what we know as the Welfare Act.
Okay.
Before he left office, and that act alone was the catalyst for what the issues we have now today.
Yes.
And it's only been continued on by all current politicians, because now we're at a point, if you completely remove that system, or that system, if you will, from, or if you remove that thing from the system right now, our system will ultimately collapse, because we would have families within complete disparity.
Yeah, how do you remove that? It's just like, how do you look, it's the same thing to be said similarly to like the border. Like, how do you realistically, when you have millions of people that have flooded into our country from all over the place, how do you actually go through and vet them? How do you actually go through and catch all of them? How do you actually go through and deport all of them? How does that realistically make sense to do? It doesn't. And so the welfare system is broken, though, because it's incentivized the wrong things. The only thing that we can really do in society, and I've thought a lot about this, but you have to incentivize the polar opposite as well. A lot of, like JD Vance has said, and yes, JD Vance says a lot of stupid shit, but he's 37. He's a senator coming out of Ohio. He's 37, right? He's very immature in politics. He's very young in politics, and so there's some grace to be given and whatnot. He's not Trump, he can't just say what he wants and get away with it. Only
Mhm.
Trump can do that for some way, shape, or form. But you have to incentivize the polar opposite of the Welfare Act. You have to pass an act that incentivizes the polar opposite. Like a lot of what JD Vance is saying, upping the child tax credit for families who have children. Incentivize it. You get what you incentivize. That's the point of this. You get
Yeah.
what you incentivize. If you go back to post World War II and you look at de jure segregation, there's a point I'm making with all this. What was incentivized? What was incentivized was building these stacked housings, apartment buildings in these major booming economic areas post World War II to bring in people to work and stack their housing, things like that. And
Mhm.
then also what was incentivized was these real estate companies who were incentivizing these white families to move to another neighborhood, another development, to sell their houses and then to sell them to these and then flip them for a profit essentially to these African American families who could barely afford them. And then these new areas turns into slums, and then the government can come in, tear those down, and then build more stack housing. And it was a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again to today. So it's you get what you incentivize. You get what you incentivize. Look around. They are a ridiculous amount of single mothers, divorced families. Like it's the norm now, right? It's the normal. Kids being raised by a single mother, kids being raised by a non-parent. Dad's not in the picture. That's completely normal. When a dad is in the picture, it's like a shock to the system.
Mhm.
And so it's really, really sad. But you get what you incentivize, and you're right. Like if you take that, or if you just pull the plug on that and kill it, you're going to damage a lot of families because a lot of families rely on that. But that's also if you rely on that and that's what get your lifeline, that's okay. But where was I going with that? If you pull these things and it creates that disarray and that disparity, then we need to figure out a way to wean those people off too, right? Like
Yeah.
get them transitional employment, transitional housing, get them in programs and whatnot. We send billions of dollars overseas to Lord knows where, to where that actually goes. It said it's going to one place, but then the next report is saying, well, it's staying here in the country to make these things for these other country that we're going to send, and yada yada yada. No one knows where that money's actually going. No one
Yeah.
knows what that money's actually doing, right? These billions of dollars that are increasing our national deficit and whatnot. No one knows what they're doing, and so you have to set up these programs, and so that takes time, but it can be done. Obviously we have the money and resources to send everywhere else to help solve their problems, but we don't use that money here in America to take care of our own problem, to take
Yeah.
care of recreating the nuclear family. We wonder why there's so many threats in the home. We wonder why there's so many threats in our schools. We wonder why there's so many a lack of education. Why third grade is a huge milestone for kids to get past, because that's when they can really learn how to read, and that's when they gain their full literacy skills and whatnot. And why there's a lot of people who can't read past the third grade level because they were just pushed along. Kids are just pushed along now. Whether they can succeed or not, they just push them along, push them along, push them along. No child left behind, things like that. So
that was a continuation of who was it? It was in the I think it was in the 70s or the 80s. I think it was late 70s to mid 80s. Essentially, that was it's what we now know as No Child Left Behind, because every president has. Well, I lied. It's no longer No Child Left Behind. It was Obama did. Obama changed it, critiqued it, and changed it and made it his own. And I don't remember what he called it. Trump, I think he technically added on a few things to Obama's thing as well. So like, I don't remember exactly what they call it now. I mean, but what we know, most of us know as No Child Left Behind, essentially was a program.
It's the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, replace
There we
No
go.
Child Left Behind.
Yep. And so like, but this idea is that no kid can fail, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean kids can't be held back, and kids haven't been held back, but it's what it does is. Go ahead.
No, it's so that kids can't be held back now.
So
It's
yeah,
depending on the state, really. But
yeah.
here in Washington State, like kids can't be held back. Like kids can absolutely not be held back except for extreme circumstances. Even if they miss 90% of the school year, they're still pushed on to the next grade.
And that's the thing, because they don't. I don't. Most of these schools, though, like because they receive and they count on state funding, which state funding relies on federal funding. They're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
if more kids in my school district or in with my school fail, that means less money for us here at the school, and we're already not getting a lot as it is. So, hopefully there's someone who cares, or hopefully these parents step up and teach them how to read, teach them how to write, and so they can catch up to their peers. And it is what it is. And we're just pushing kids along. And so this is, for me, kind of goes back to, we are no longer prioritizing education. We're just prioritizing pushing kids through these made up roadblocks that we've created, say first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and so on and so forth. And then we're telling them go to college. And these kids are not prepared to go to college because they're barely prepared to be in high school as it is. And so slowing things down and prioritizing just the simple things, right? Like going back to the basics is one of the amazing things that we could do. Reading, writing, arithmetic, science, history. 5 subjects right there, in which once these kids get a grasp on these things and they go from there, all these other things that you want to teach them would be amazing, right? And don't
Mm-hmm.
get me wrong, I know some teachers out there and people who are probably listening who are involved within the education system will tell you it's like basically that's what we are teaching them. But if that was the case, why does you guys are so their teachers are so strong armed to say, hey, you have an hour to teach this one subject, you have an hour to teach this other subject, and these kids are going to be here for X amount of time, and then also send them
Mm-hmm.
home with homework, and then they need to come back and they need to remember everything you taught them the day before, and we're just freaking checking the block, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
actually prioritizing the education and saying, do you understand why I taught you this, or why this is important, where you can apply these, how you can utilize this math or say these math computations, or this or reading, writing, or where this applies in your life? Are you just sitting there going through it because someone told you had to? Right? We need to
Mm-hmm.
the why is so important. And believe it or not, kids are really smart. Kids are really smart. And if you can tell
Oh,
them the why
100%,
to a
absolutely.
lot of things, man, that just gives them more incentive to be like, oh, okay, I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And they may not care. Don't get me wrong. Not every kid's going to sit there and be like, I'm super excited because I'm doing math now because I'm learning. It could help me learn how to do my taxes. No. Not every kid's going to be that way. But it does help to give them the why, rather than just saying, hey, go do the thing because I'm the adult and you're the kid and I told you to do what you do. I tell you what to do.
Yeah.
And right. And so we need to shift our focus and, like you said, shift our priorities and ultimately change what our focus is and what we incentivize within our culture and within society. Because if we change that, we can build a culture and society that is thriving, where everybody or most people are thriving. I'm a realistic person, and I understand that there are going to be people who are not going to thrive, who are not going to do as well as others. But I will tell you all this, and this is one of the most important things for me when it comes to, as far as running a business and being successful within my personal and professional life, and what I tell my kids and what I tell my soldiers at work. Your success to you is what you determine success is, right? So I tell people all the time, I have no ambition to make Elon Musk money. I don't have any ambition to make that type of money. Because I can tell you right now, that's a lot of work to make that money. And that's a lot of time that I don't want to take away from spending with my kids and my family. And don't get me wrong, that money would be great. Making that money would be
Absolutely.
phenomenal, right? For any of us. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But what I will say is, success for me is I have a number. And when I started one of my first businesses, and one of my buddies was like, hey, we should start a business together. We should do this thing. I told him, I said, hey, man, that's great. But one of the first things I want to know is, what's your number? And he was like, what do you mean by that? I said, well, what's your number that you say, hey, once you make this much money, once you profit this much money, that you're good. It's no longer about making money, it's in profiting and becoming this rich, wealthy person. It's about, hey, I have something I created and I'm proud of this thing that I created. And he goes, well, I haven't really thought of that, so I need to get back to you. He goes, well, since you asked me, what's your number? I said $200,000 is my number, in which if I can make $200,000 from my business alone, profiting $200,000 a business alone a
Mm-hmm.
year, I would be happy, right? I would be that. For me, that is success. That is success. I've reached the point where I'm happy. I can spend time with my family. I have enough money to do what I need to do. My house is taken care of, food on the table, cars, vehicles, whatever the case may, all these amenities that I need in my life, everything is taken care of. That was my number, and I think it's gone up since inflation's gone up. I'm not gonna lie to you.
You're right.
So 300,000 might be my number now, because this was a 5-year conversation that happened 5 years ago. But that is
Okay.
what success looks like for me, right? That is where I'm like, this means I'm successful. Means I've reached success, right? So I tell people all the time, this is something you need to think about, right? Because while I understand that, I can sit here and try to sell you on this dream stuff and be happy and make yourself happy and help society, I know most people that doesn't drive them. That's not a driving force for people anymore. So I understand, and most people the driving force is money. So what is your number? Find your number. Once you find that number, you need to create a plan to determine how are you going to get to that number. And what are you willing to do to get to that number? So,
Absolutely. No, I think it's important to have those clear goals in mind. It's important to teach our kids to have those clear goals,
Yep.
know, and that you're going to fail along the way. No
Yes.
one's going to come and hold your hand along the way. Yes, you can have mentors. Yes, you can have coaches and people who are there alongside you who support you, but that's different. That is different than you having to do it on your own and someone holding your hand. Yes, someone can support you through it. Like if you're struggling, like I think the Japan example, like you said earlier, is a really great example of this, to where yes, they fail and they're given chances to try again. One thing I heard of a teacher recently in a classroom that I was in, she said, your brain can't fix itself if you don't try. So if you try and you get it wrong, that's okay. Your brain's going to fix itself. Your brain's going to fix it. You keep trying, your brain's eventually going to fix it. Whether that's and she was talking in the context of like counting by fours and things like that. And one of her students really struggled with it. And now the more he tried and tried and tried and failed, did it. Now he does it easy, no problem. Took him just a few days to do it. The brain fixes itself. The brain does itself. And so that's important to teach our children, that success is going to be, some of that success is going to be because of the failure, because of the things you learn along the way, because of your brain having to fix itself to learn from those mistakes and to self-correct. Our brains are crazy powerful machines in our heads that we know very little to nothing about. We know a lot about the brain, but we don't know nearly as much as it actually holds and what it can do. And so the success, we have to put, I think you should always put some kind of tangible number behind it to what that success looks like. Like for me with this podcast, it's like I want to reach 1 million dads. I want to meet not just dads, but I want to reach 1 million people who hear the messages of the podcast and it helps them in some way, shape, or form, whether that's through a laugh, maybe that's through a charged conversation, maybe that leads them to take action, maybe that leads them to make a change in their life, maybe that leads them to some kind of positive change forward, right? And so that's the goal, 1 million. When I hit 1 million, heck, I don't know what I do. I don't know if that's the time to hang it up and call it a podcasting career or what. So, but we'll get there when we get there. We're not there. We're not close to that yet, but someday we will be.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that's undervalued is time. And I'm fully aware. So like even with the Mediocre Dads podcast, I do get defeated at times. I get defeated because on YouTube I have 168, I think it is, subscribers, and it's defeating because I'm like, man, it just feels like I've been stuck in this spot for so long, and I'm trying to reach 500 to 1,000, and you're just trying to like, what do I need to do here? How do I improve this? Where do I go? What is it that people want to see? What is it that people want to value, that they value, that wants to bring to the channel? And one of the things that I have to remind myself is just kind of I do a reflection, and when I do this reflection, I can tell you it does put a smile on my face and make me realize that I have come a long way, because I do remember when I started my channel and it was at 0. And now there were like 5 or 10 people who subscribed because they were friends, and they were like, oh, you're doing a thing. I, like show my support and whatever the case might be. And so, but then now, and that was last year, March, to now, this where I'm at 168 subscribers. That is people. There are people on there who saw something on my channel and said, hey, I want to subscribe to this guy's freaking channel. I don't know. I saw some of his videos doing some great stuff, and I'm going to subscribe to his channel. On Instagram, when I started the Mediocre Dad's Instagram page, right? I remember having 0. Now I'm at 600 and something odd people, and it's closer to 1,000, which I can't wait to reach 1,000. But like I've hit these milestones, but I've overlooked the milestones that I've hit to say, well, I'm not where I want to be still. And it's like, hey, hold on, take a step back, look at it for full picture here. You're better off than when you first started. Better off when I was 6 months when I first started, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, there are people who are able to move a lot faster and be a lot more successful and like sooner than me in that regards. But like, that's okay. Things take time. I told my wife, I said, 5 years is the time that I have given myself to profit from mediocre dads. And some people say that's a long time. I'm like, yeah, it sure it is. But like, here's my thing: to be in this space, Joe Rogan didn't start a podcast in 2020, guys. Joe Rogan has had a podcast for years.
Since the early 2000s.
Yes. And so it was just people started paying attention to the podcast. And since when COVID started and he was having these conversations that people were really wanting to tune into and weren't getting from their mainstream media. So like Joe Rogan has had a podcast for years. He's had crazy guests on his podcast for years. It just took some time for people to notice. And now when Joe Rogan has a deal with Spotify where he's making, I think it was like $2 million or something.
It's way more than that. It's way more.
Was it more than that? Yeah.
50 million or something.
It was a ridiculous number, right? But like, these things take time, and you have to understand these take time. So if Joe Rogan has been doing his podcasting thing, let's just say for 10 plus years, who am I to
million?
My gosh, that's ridiculous.
A multi-year partnership deal for the controversial podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, which is said to be worth up to $250 million. But what Spotify also did was said, we are so comfortable and confident in your product here, well, we're going to let you put it on other platforms. Yes. We're going to not make it a Spotify exclusive. Like, yes, we're going to pay you and you're going to distribute it through us and whatnot, but you can put it on Apple, you can put it on YouTube. You put it back wherever you want.
And that
yeah, you put it back on YouTube.
Because the crazy part is they were like, hey, we allow them to put it back on YouTube. Guess what that does? That only drives up revenue for Joe Rogan, and that drives up profits for Spotify, right? And so like these are things like, and I tell you guys, it's like, don't get me wrong, it took time. Elon Musk bought Tesla back in 2003, and Tesla almost closed down under his as CEO back in 2004, and he put all he had left in his savings account, if you will, all the money he had left, he put it back into Tesla in 2004. 2005, they started pumping out more stuff. Now Elon Musk is one of the wealthiest men in the world, right? So understand, and Elon Musk, and this was all happening. Elon Musk wasn't in his 20s. He was in his 30s going into his 40s when all of this started happening for him to be where he is now. Jeff Bezos, whether you like these individuals or not, what you need to see is look at the roadmap that they had, right? Jeff Bezos Amazon took off and became one of the wealthiest countries when he was in his 40s. It wouldn't happen when he was in his 20s.
Started in the garage.
Yeah,
started in the garage.
And
Apple started in the garage.
I want people to understand, especially young men, especially and to my dads who are like, I want to do something, and I want to figure out where my niche is in this world. What is there a product I could sell? Is there something that's needed, that people value, that I could profit from to help my family? Then ultimately I'm adding some value to the world. There 100% is. Understand. Trust the process. As cheesy as that, as cliche as that sounds, you have to trust the process, and you have to trust you and believe in yourself and say, hey, I'm willing to fail if it means I learned something. My very first business, it failed. And that's the business that I was telling you guys about, where I learned so much and about that I started. My very first business, it failed. And while it failed, I've learned so much about starting a business. I've learned so much about that within that logistics world and how that works, that when people talk and they're telling me all these things and I start asking them questions, they're like, how do you know about this? I said, I had a business, I did that. So like, I just want to know, I'm trying to figure out where your head's at, kind of what works, where you're at with all that, whatever the case might be. But it's amazing because they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, and it's value. And I'm able to give them my experiences, give them my knowledge of what I've learned from those things. But I wanted to kind of go back real quick, and that was to kind of speak on the family core. And and a purpose for dads and for young men, right? And for young men who are about to get married and about to be fathers, whatever the case might be. um this is one thing that I would say that's very important to me is you have to, while it's great that you be present in your kids' lives and you're focused and you're working and putting food on the table and whatever the case might be. But the main thing, the main priority for me, the thing that has shifted for me is there's one thing that I do, and that's my main priority in life, is my main priority in life, and that is to put God first. God is first in everything that I do. I tell you all that because I want you to understand that while all these things that I'm talking about might sound good and these things might be great, but the reality is for me that God is what has changed my life. Getting back into my faith and believing and understanding what it means for what it meant for Jesus to die on the cross for my sins, what it means for me to pray every single day, what it means for me to be in tune with my Bible, what it means to be a person who can speak on the topic of God and just say, hey, God wants to change our hearts. He wants to change our spirits. He wants to fill us with the Holy Spirit to change our hearts and direct us. And then you realize you start to value things different. You start to value different things and see and understand what your priorities are. That is why I'm so passionate about dads, and because the core of that is that you need a man that loves and believes in God, and that he then teaches his family the same thing, and then from there it just spreads. And then that is the core, that is the nucleus, that is the foundation of which a strong, solid family is built on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Because you have to have that foundation, right? You have to have your foundation. You have to build it upon the rock. There's only one rock that works for all this, and that's God. That's Jesus. That's the Bible. That's the principles that are taught within there. That's the foundation. There's no other foundation. Everything else is sand.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is sand. You can try to justify it as rock. It's not rock. It's sand. And so you have to have your foundation on a rock. Do you build a house on sand, or do you build it with concrete? Do you build it with, I don't know, soft materials, or do you build it with concrete? Concrete. It's always concrete. That's what lasts the longest. That's what holds the house upright. That's what keeps everything flowing and hooing and humming, is concrete. So it's important to recognize. It's important to realize that. It's important to have that foundation there, and God first, right? There's a linear order of all those things to where it goes. God, and then your spouse, and then kids, and then your ministry, and then God, spouse, ministry. No, God, spouse, kids, ministry, work. In that order, and it should be in that order. It should go in that order for maximum efficiency. So important to realize that.
My father-in-law taught me, and I say taught me because he took me a while, and he always asked me. Every once in a while, he'll always ask me this question, and he'll outline. He'll say, "Hey, who do you put first in your life?" And my first answer when he first asked me this question was my wife, and he was like, "That's wrong." I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "That's wrong." He goes, "It's God, it's your wife, it's your kids, it's your work, then it's you." And I was like, he goes, "Yep, that is how I live my life. That is that is how I prioritize my life." He goes, "At the end of the day, I am last. Everything, but God is first. My wife is second, well, which is my mother-in-law." and and he goes, "Your kids are third." And I asked him when I became a dad, I said, why do you put your kids under your wife?" He goes, "Because my wife is the reason I have kids. My wife is the person who at the end of the day, when my kids go off and they leave the home, right? When a man leaves his house and become a man, right? Or daughters leave the home to become women and to become spouses, right? He goes, at the end of the day, my wife is the one who is left here with me. That is what, and like, it's so amazing because then it makes me think back to Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve, when at the end of the day, when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? Who did they have? They had each other. They had each other. And that to me, that's kind of where my brain goes and where I realize like, that is so amazing. So like, I love my kids, y'all. I do anything for my kids, but
Absolutely.
the hierarchy always for me is God, my wife, my kids, and then work, and then me. And that's where it goes from there.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree 100% there. Any other thoughts or anything that you want to add here before we get to wrapping this thing up?
No, I think I'm good to go.
Awesome. Love it. Well, we touched on everything. eh, We touched on everything. We touched on so many great things today. We had such a great conversation. We talked about a lot. I can't even remember all the things we talked about, but we dove into the nitty gritty. We started off hot. We stayed hot, and we're gonna cool off a little bit here. Before we cool off, I do just want to shout out the opening and now our closing beat, the beat that you're hearing right now. That you can still hear me talk over comes from the Podbeat app. I'm going to cut it real quick. The Podbeat app allows you to turn any podcast or any audiobook into a musical experience. If you're into working out, if you're into running, if you're into doing all the things, fitness, things like that, or if you just need a little extra oomph to your podcast or your audiobook. Let's say the audiobook reader is super boring. I don't know how many times that's happened to me, but Podbeat has you covered. It can overlay your podcast player or it can overlay your audiobook player, and it can allow you to add a beat to kick it up. And it also allows you to set your cadence, set your beats per minute, things like that. It's on some really cool scientific 3-minute cycle, rhythmic, whatever. I don't know how to explain it, but it's really great. 100% would recommend downloading the Podbeat app for free from wherever you get your apps from. And additionally, I want to shout out the other partners of the podcast: Forefathers Apparel, Dad Bought Apparel, the June app. And at the top, I already mentioned that we are on Patreon. So make sure you go and do all those things to show your support and love of the podcast. So Q, if you could sit down and have a heart-to-heart with any famous dad, past or present, who would it be, and what's one question you want to ask him?
Oh man, I saw this. I saw when you asked this question to one of your previous guests, because I was kind of doing my homework, and I started thinking about this, and I was like, if he asked me that question, I was like, I don't know who I'm going to say, but I think I have one answer. I do know who I'm going to say. And this might sound, I don't care how it sounds. I know who it is. If I could, this dad might not. I don't even think this dad's famous per se in the sense of how we see famous. But John the Baptist's dad. I know he's mentioned in the Bible. I can't remember his name right now for the life of me. But John the Baptist's dad, and here's the reason why. So John the Baptist, his family, how John the Baptist came
Zechariah.
Zechariah, there we go. Zechariah. So Zechariah, right? He was a priest. He would go to the synagogue and he would do priestly duties. And at that time, and how it worked is he wasn't like an everyday thing. I imagine it was like once a quarter thing. However, it's outlined kind of in the Bible. But more or less, anyway, why this is important? Zechariah and his wife were. She was basically
Elizabeth,
said
I think.
I think it was Elizabeth. Barren, couldn't have children, and then all of a sudden she became pregnant. But she became pregnant after Zechariah was blind. He became blind. The story and how John the Baptist came to fruition. It's an amazing story. But here's the reason why I want to talk to Zechariah. Right, is because he was told that his son was going to be amazing. Right, but his son was necessary because he was coming. He was called. It was foretold that he was to come before Jesus was to come. So now, but imagine you're told that your son is going to do amazing things, and he's going to do these amazing things before the true Jesus is supposed to arrive, right? But then Jesus is, Elizabeth was sisters. There were sisters or aunts or whatever how they were related.
Something.
Or they were related in the sense. It's important. That nitty gritty, I promise, is not necessarily important, but this part necessarily is important, right? Is Mary is meeting with Elizabeth, talking with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is like, yes, I'm pregnant, and Mary's like, I'm pregnant too, and they're kind of talking, and they're kind of telling about their experiences thus far, and it's kind of crazy because Mary's sitting here like, I'm holding Jesus, you're holding John, and he's going to be the one, he's the one who's supposed to come before my son. But imagine being Zechariah, this guy who's been blinded, and you're sitting here and you're like, I'm going to have this amazing son. And I just want to know, I want to sit down and talk to him, just kind of see like, hey, what was your thought process? What did you think about, how did you think about fathering this man that you were told that he's going to do amazing things? right? And how did you go about raising him? Did you were you harder on him because you're like, hey, you're going to be great, or were you kind of were you did you take it easy on him? What did you do to heal, to lead this, to guide this man? Because he was born, and don't worry, God was in John's life, but John still had a father. John still had
Hmm.
an earthly father who had a responsibility to lead him and then ultimately be the one that he baptized when he baptized Jesus. And John said it to himself. He's like, I'm not worthy to baptize you. You should be the one baptizing me. And he's like,
Right.
he goes, no, it was foretold that I need you to baptize me. And so, and obviously when John baptized Jesus, it was said when Jesus came out of the water, heaven opened, everyone saw their heaven open up. And this is John went in amazement, was like, it's real. This is all real. Everything that everything I've been telling you guys about, everything that, like I've been preaching about, if you will, it's real. This is the Son Man. This is Jesus. He's the guy. He's the guy we've been waiting for. And I say that because, again, I think it's amazing when you're told that you're going to have a great son or a powerful son, right? How do you lead? How do you lead that man? How do you grow and develop that man to ensure that they're great, rather than just sitting there and say, well, God said they're going to be great. I don't really got to do anything. He doesn't need me anymore. No, no, no. You're still necessary. You're still required. So if that could be me, that's who I would talk to.
I love that. Mine was more contemporary, but I when I thought about this one, since I've asked it, I've thought about it. I would go probably like Uncle Phil.
Hmm.
Probably Uncle Phil's a legend. And then if I was going into like the animated world of dads, I'd probably go Bob from Bob's Burgers. Him and Big Bob,
Yeah.
both of them would be pretty cool. But yeah, I like your answers. Top notch, A+. I'll take a D- on that one. Um, what's a dad hack that you picked up that's made a big difference in your daily routine with your daughters?
Ooh, a dad hack. It's I don't know if it's a hack necessarily, but this is something that I like to do. I like to prioritize. Is when I come home, and the first thing that I do is I hug and kiss hug and kiss my daughters, hug and kiss my wife. Um, I'll change, go to the bathroom, come back downstairs, and then within an hour or so, I'll say, "Hey, let's get your shoes on. We're going to the park." And I'll take my kid. I try to take my kids to the park every evening, not all evenings if I can, but most evenings, because I want them to, one, get all their energy out, but two,
Yes,
I want them to know that we don't just sit around in the house, and we can have fun, and they look forward to, hey, Dad, can we go to the park? Can we
hmm
go to the park, and they get to just be outside and be kids. But it's amazing how that transfers to when it's time for bed. Man, bedtime's a lot easier now, rather than trying to
I
contain
bet.
their energy inside and say, hey, run around or wrestle. Like, no, no, no. Like, go to the park. Go spend 15-20 minutes at the park. Man, they come back, bath, brush their teeth, do what they need to do, get in bed. Bedtime goes a lot smoother when we go to the park. So
I bet. I bet. If you could sum up your parenting philosophy in one sentence, what would it be?
I don't necessarily know if I have a sentence, but I think I have 2 words: critical thinking.
Whoa, you're we're gonna get back into the conversation there. Hold on now. Um, but no, important, very important. Last kind of fun, easy question here. What's one thing your daughters have taught you about life that you didn't expect?
Love, I would say, is, I had my own interpretation of love. I've what it looked like, what I thought it was. And when my daughters were both born, it was like a fire that was lit in my heart, that let me know that, no, this is what love looks like. This is what real, genuine love is.
I love that. And the very, very last question here as we wrap this thing up. What advice would you offer to a young dad who's 18, 22 years old, super young, just had his first kid, just starting out on his fatherhood journey? One or two pieces of advice for him.
You're going to fail as a dad. You're going to think that you have it all. You might think you have it all figured out, or you're going to say, I have to have it all figured out. But be in the moment. Learn to be in the moment, rather than thinking about and trying to plan of, like, okay, if my kid says no, what am I going to do? Right? No, just be in the
Mhm.
moment and trust me. All of these things will come. How you decide, how you discipline your kids, how you spend time with your kids, whatever the case, all those things will come. But just learn to live in the moment rather than thinking about what 5 to 10 years looks like every single moment you're with your kids.
I love that. I love that. And very lastly, go ahead and tell the people where they can find you, find the podcast, and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Absolutely. So Mediocre Dads Podcast, it is on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You just do search Mediocre Dads and I will come up. If you're on Instagram or Facebook, we do have a Facebook page. Follow the Facebook page on Instagram. Follow the Mediocre Dads Instagram. That is where I put primarily all of my information out on what's coming up or what we have coming or about the episodes or whatever the case might be. On Twitter, or better known as X now. I am on X. So if you just do mediocre_dads, and that's the same for Instagram, mediocre_dads, that is where you can find us. And we appreciate you to join us and lock into our podcast and visit us. Oh, I'm sorry. And
I love that, man.
website,
Go ahead.
mediocredads.net. There we go. I forget to plug my website every single time, but mediocredads.net.
Bro, I always forget the website.
Oh man, but that's it. That's all. The places I'm at.
I love it, man. Well, thank you for your time today. It's much appreciated. Thank you to our listeners. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We hope you learned something, got something out of it. We're able to research something, or something sparked in you to take some action, do something different, or to make a change, whatever it may be. Hope you got something out of this episode. Make sure to go to all the places: YouTube, Rumble. I like to call it Twix. Twitter, X. I like to call it Twix.
There we go.
I don't know if that's a copyright thing, but I call it Twix. YouTube, Rumble, Twix, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, all the social medias, all the places you can get a podcast. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Most common one. Actually, Overcast has been a really popular one for us lately too. So wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're at, make sure to do the things that you can to support both the Young Dad podcast and the Mediocre Dads podcast as well by rating, reviewing, leave 5 stars, interacting with the Q&A, polls, and comment section of all the places to show your engagement. Engagement truly does help. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, leave 5 stars, leave a review. All those things also do greatly help the podcast. If you want the full transcript of the episode, you can go head over to youngdadpod.com and you can find the full transcript. And you can also find the show notes as well, which will have the applicable links, things like that, to mediocredads.net and to all the other things that we may have mentioned during the podcast, and also other resources, things that I felt were applicable to the podcast as well. You can find right over there on the resource page. And also you can read the associated blog for this episode right there over on youngdadpod.com. I think that's everything. Make sure to go over to Patreon, become a patron, and we'll see you next time right here on the Young Dad Podcast.